Hi everyone, and welcome to our last week on rhythm and percussion for this semester. So because your upcoming second assessment is due at the end of this week on Friday the 21st of September at 5 p.m, this is a video to clarify and demonstrate some of the requirements for that assessment, as well as give some advice. So what I've got here, just created with MIDI programming, is kind of a condensed demo project to demonstrate each part of the assessment. So hopefully by now everyone has been able to find the Assessment 2 documentation on Blackboard, and you will have seen that the main requirement is to have 3 different drum beats that you've built yourself using audio samples or MIDI programming. And in light of that, the first thing I'd like to clarify is what I mean exactly by a drum beat. So while it would be great for you to use percussion in a variety of different ways throughout your piece, what I'm looking for when I say 3 drum beats is something that can be repeated continuously throughout a section. So not something small and functional, like a build or a solo of some kind, but the actual backbone of the music. Or in another way of thinking, something that you might typically find as a drum loop. Now of course this doesn't have to involve a traditional kick, snare and hi-hat, as long as it's a fleshed out and repeatable beat, rather than a smaller functional feature of some kind. So to demonstrate, I'll play for you now the first drum beat that I've written in this MIDI project. So as we can hear, that's clearly something that could be repeated throughout a section. That could form the drum beat for our verse or chorus, for instance. Now contrasting with this is something smaller and functional, like a build. So if I come over here, I'll demonstrate a build in context. Yeah, so you could hear that might have been a way to bridge 2 different drum beats or perhaps build intensity, but because it was so short and functional, it's not necessarily something that we would actually repeat during a section. So for example, if I change this loop region here, just to hear it on repeat, I'll demonstrate. Yeah, so it would be highly unusual to hear that underneath a verse or a chorus or something. So to clarify, this build here wouldn't count as one of your 3 fully fleshed drum beats, but note that I would still very much recommend that you try to demonstrate the functional use of percussion in writing for something like a build or an ending or a solo of some kind. So again, we want 3 different drum beats, but I'm also assessing the wider use of percussion. Now on that note, it would also be worth clarifying what I mean by different drum beats. And a distinction I'd like to make here is the difference between a unique drum beat and a variation of an existing drum beat. So I'll play our first drum beat once more, just to set up a comparison. Now I'll come over here and play a variation of that same drum beat. It's a very simple variation. All I've done is taken the hi-hat rhythm and placed it instead on a ride cymbal. So here's how that sounds. You can also hear that there was an extra crash cymbal added. Now while this makes a substantial difference to the texture and intensity of the drum beat, particularly with the washing tone of the new cymbals, it wouldn't be classed as a separate or unique drum beat in the context of this assessment. But again, like with the build, I'd still very much recommend that you try to exercise some sort of development or variation of the drum beats that you do use. So you may have perhaps written a drum beat one for your first verse, and then if you have a second verse, perhaps bring it back with a variation for increased intensity. But again, we won't consider those as actual separate drum beats. To achieve a separate drum beat, what we're going to want is some sort of variation in the rhythm or overall character of the drum beat. So something, for example, that we might use in 2 different sections. Now, of course, this doesn't mean we have to change the tempo or the time signature or anything like that, and we can even use the same drums, but their rhythms will have to be distinguishably separate. So here's drum beat 2 to demonstrate. Great, so as opposed to the first drum beat, there's an immediate difference through the lack of snare in the second. We also have some new sounds coming in, like that clicking sound that you may have heard. Just there. And we also have quite a different kick rhythm. It's somewhat of a dialed down drum beat, perhaps as a lapse in intensity or to prepare us for a new section. So again, for example, if we hear them back to back, we can clearly hear that they're 2 different drum beats. Extending this example to a third different drum beat, again still with very similar drums and sounds, just a different rhythm. We'll hear that now. So again, this time the difference is that we have a very different treatment of the hi-hat. It's occurring much more regularly and we're hearing a lot more open hi-hat than in either of the other 2 drum beats. And again, we also have a different rhythm on the kick and snare, but still the same time signature, tempo, and generally the same instrument set. Now, of course, in your own assessment, you don't need them back to back like this, and they don't need to change this often. A better way to approach this would be to have a drum beat specific to each section, so perhaps a verse beat, a more intense chorus beat, and then a later bridge or breakdown beat. That'd be a simple way to demonstrate 3 unique drum beats. And of course, in between all of this, consider any way you could use drums at a smaller functional scale, such as a build or perhaps this ending here. But now just to demonstrate all together to show that they're still compatible and cohesive with one another, we'll play from the start. Great, so now that we've also heard this ending, one thing I'd just also like to specify is that it was just a variation of the second drum beat. So to demonstrate, and now here we'll hear the same rhythm but with additional layers. Yeah, so once more, this is just a variation of the second drum beat, and it's also only used as a small structural gesture. Yeah, so hopefully that clarifies the assessment's intention in saying 3 separate drum beats. And of course, I'd also encourage you to try to write percussion for a situation like a build, or perhaps to try to vary one of the drum beats within your assessment so that it shows development over time. Now with that all clarified, there's just a few things I'd like to remind you about for the assessment in general. So first and foremost, don't forget about all the things that we've learnt this semester already. Make sure you still consider the structure of your piece. Make sure you consider the way the layers work together musically. So even though it's a piece focused on percussion, you can still have melodic layers, and we don't want any clashing between them. And then further, don't forget to balance and mix your project. So to use our volume and panning bars over here, or even further to automate. So again, by pressing V on our keyboard to manipulate a volume envelope, or alternatively P for panning. So beyond that, I'd also highly recommend that you apply some of the techniques that we looked at last week, which is to say layering multiple tracks of percussion together, whether to build the texture or raise intensity, as well as to apply some dynamic variation to your drum beats. And on that note, I might just quickly demonstrate that with a MIDI clip selected, if we open up our editor and press F on our keyboard, we'll actually be able to access a more graphic representation of velocity. So rather than having to click these individual MIDI notes and type a new velocity, using this method we can actually drag individual data points to access velocity more quickly. But I'll just exit back out of that now. But with all of that covered, there's just one final thing I'd like to address about the screenshots for this assessment. So as with the first assessment, I'm also asking you again to submit screenshots of your project so I can visualize your work. But this time, rather than demonstrating the entire project or trying to show progress, what I'd like your screenshots to do is clearly identify each of the 3 unique drum beats that you've written. Now, of course, you can have more than 3 unique drum beats, and you can include more than 3 screenshots if you'd like, but the requirement itself is to show me the 3 different drum beats that you've written. Now, on that note, I'd also encourage you in your documentation to refer to these screenshots. You may, for example, be analyzing your second drum beat and discussing its stylistic or structural use, or even how you built the drum beat, at which point it would be great for you to refer to that screenshot. But yeah, that largely wraps up all of the requirements for this assessment. Just a reminder for anyone who hasn't realized, you're absolutely welcome to include any other loops or layers in this project, anything ranging from melodic material to things that you've recorded yourself, or even atmospheric samples like wind and rain, etc. As long as the focus is on demonstrating the use of percussion in music, and as long as you demonstrate 3 individual drum beats. So of course, direct any questions to the discussion forums or the Collaborate session that we'll be holding on the Thursday before it's due on Friday the 21st of September. I wish you all luck in your assessments, and I look forward to hearing your work. Thanks everyone.